The old rancher died alone. Then the town discovered what he left behind. They thought the old rancher had died with nothing. No wife, no children, no family standing beside his bed. Just a worn-out blanket, a Bible with a cracked leather cover, and a little brass key tied to a piece of blue string. That was what the nurse found on the table beside him when his breathing finally stopped. His name was Samuel Whitaker, though almost nobody in Mabel Creek called him Samuel. To most folks, he was simply Old Sam from the North Ridge, the man who never smiled at the grocery store, the man who paid in exact change, the man who drove the same faded green pickup long after the doors stopped closing right, the man children whispered about because his ranch sat behind 2 miles of locked gate and cedar trees, and because nobody could remember the last time he invited anyone past the porch.
When news spread that Sam Whitaker was gone, people said the things people say when they do not know what else to say. Poor old man. Shame he died alone. I wonder who gets the land. And that last question, quiet as it was, moved through town faster than grief ever could. By supper time, people were already guessing. The banker guessed the property would go to the state. The realtor guessed some developer would buy it and split the pastures into expensive country homes. The mayor guessed the town might finally get that stretch of road widened. And Sam's only living relatives, 2 nephews who had not visited him in nearly 12 years, guessed they were about to become rich men. They were wrong. Every one of them, because old Sam Whitaker had been quiet, not empty. He had been alone, not forgotten. And behind the locked door of his north barn, hidden beneath a loose board near the grain room, he had left something that would make half the town cry and the other half hang their heads in shame. But nobody knew that yet. On the morning of his funeral, only 9 people came. 9 people for a man who had lived in Mabel Creek for more than 70 years. 9 people for a man whose cattle had crossed nearly every pasture north of town. 9 people for a man who, as everyone would soon learn, had carried more secrets than any one heart should have been asked to carry. Welcome to Mabel Creek Stories. Here, we tell quiet stories about family secrets, second chances, forgotten promises, and the kind of justice that does not always arrive loudly. But when it comes, it changes everything. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel, settle in, and stay with me until the end. Because in Mabel Creek, the truth has a way of finding its way home. The first person to notice Sam Whitaker was gone was not a relative. It was the mail carrier. Her name was Ruth Bell, and she had been delivering mail along the North Ridge route for almost 20 years. She knew which dogs barked and which dogs bit. She knew which mailboxes froze shut in January. She knew who waved and who only lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Sam Whitaker was a 2-finger man. Every morning, except Sundays and bad storms, he walked down his gravel drive to the blue mailbox at the gate. He did not hurry. At his age, hurry had left him years before. He came slow, one hand on the fence rail when the wind was strong, one shoulder always a little lower than the other from some old injury he never talked about. Ruth would slow her mail truck, slide the envelopes into the box and say, "Morning, Sam." He would nod. Sometimes he would say, "Morning." Most days, that was all. But Ruth never took it personally. She had learned that some people were not unfriendly. They were just tired in places other people could not see. On the Tuesday before the funeral, Ruth noticed the mailbox still held Monday's mail. That was unusual. Sam did not leave mail sitting. Bills, feed catalogs, church flyers, seed advertisements, it did not matter. He collected everything by noon. Ruth sat in her truck with the engine running and looked through the gate. The long drive curved up toward the house, disappearing behind cedar trees heavy with frost. She could see a slice of the porch and one corner of the barn roof. No smoke came from the chimney. No movement crossed the yard. Ruth tapped the steering wheel. "Come on, Sam," she whispered. "Do not make me worry today." She pushed fresh envelopes into the box, but she did not drive away. Instead, she took out her phone and called the only person she could think of. Deputy Caleb Norris had been on duty since before sunrise. He was not much older than 40, with a kind face and the habit of taking people seriously, even when they tried not to be taken seriously. When Ruth told him about the mail, he did not laugh. He did not say, "Old men forget things." He said, "I will go check." That was Caleb. Some officers liked a siren. Caleb liked being early enough that he never had to use one. He reached Sam's gate 15 minutes later. The chain was locked. That alone told him something was wrong. Sam locked the gate every night, but he opened it every morning. Feed trucks came through sometimes. The vet came through now and then. Caleb himself had been through once, years earlier, when a calf got tangled in old wire near the road and someone called for help. He remembered Sam that day, standing beside the fence in a sweat-stained hat, jaw set, saying more to the frightened calf than to any of the people helping him. "Easy now, easy. You are all right." Caleb had noticed then that the old man's hands were gentle, even when his voice was not. Now Caleb looked at the locked chain and felt something cold move through his chest. He found the spare key exactly where Ruth said Sam kept it, inside a rusted tobacco tin nailed under the fence post. He opened the gate and drove slowly up the gravel drive. The house looked smaller than he remembered, not because it had changed, but because grief has a way of shrinking things before it even arrives. The porch boards were gray with age. A rocking chair sat near the door, one arm polished smooth where a hand had rested year after year. Beside it stood a pair of mud boots, toes facing outward, as if their owner meant to step into them again. Caleb knocked. No answer. He knocked again. "Mr. Whitaker, it is Deputy Norris. Just checking on you." The wind moved through the cedar trees. Somewhere behind the barn, a gate clanged softly. Caleb tried the door. It was unlocked. That worried him more than the silence. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee, wood smoke, and old paper. The kitchen was neat. One mug sat beside the sink. A plate with half a piece of toast rested on the table. A newspaper lay folded beside it, open to the weather page. Sam Whitaker was in the bedroom at the back of the house. He was sitting in a chair by the window, not in the bed. His hat was on his knee. His boots were on. The Bible lay open in his lap. For a second, Caleb thought the old man was sleeping. Then he saw the stillness. There is a kind of stillness that belongs only to the dead. Anyone who has seen it knows. Caleb removed his hat without thinking. "Oh, Sam," he said quietly. On the small table beside the chair were 3 things: a glass of water, a brass key tied to blue string, and an envelope with Caleb's name written across the front. Not Deputy Norris, not Sir, just Caleb. The handwriting was thin and shaky, but clear. Caleb stood there for a long moment before he touched it. Something about seeing his own name in a dead man's room made him feel like he had walked into the middle of a conversation that had begun long before him. He did not open the envelope right away. First, he called it in. Then he called Dr. Harlan, who still made house calls when old folks were too stubborn to go into town. Then he called Ruth Bell and told her, gently, that she had been right to worry. By afternoon, Sam Whitaker's death was known from the diner to the feed store. By evening, the rumors had begun. That is how it often is in a small town. Truth walks. Rumor drives. At Millie's diner, 3 tables had something to say. At the first table, a retired teacher named Agnes Crow said it was a shame. At the second, A farmer named Dale Rigsby said Sam never wanted company anyway. At the counter, where coffee was poured thick and often, Mayor Whitcomb said, "I suppose somebody'll have to deal with that property now." Millie, who owned the diner and believed people showed their souls by how they talked about the dead, stopped wiping the counter. "The man has been gone less than 6 hours," she said. The mayor looked embarrassed, but not enough to be quiet. "I am only saying it is a large parcel, too large to sit unused." "It was not unused," Millie said. "He lived there." "You know what I mean." "I usually do," she said. "That is the problem." At a corner booth, 2 men in clean jackets pretended not to listen. Their names were Gary Whitaker and Lyle Whitaker, Sam's nephews. Gary was the older one, broad-faced, smooth-talking, and always dressed as if somebody might take his picture for a business card. Lyle was thinner, nervous around the eyes, and had the look of a man who had spent too much of his life agreeing with whoever seemed stronger. They had arrived in town that afternoon, not for Sam. They had not known he was dead until a cousin from 3 towns over called them. Gary had said all the right things on the phone. "Terrible news. Poor Uncle Sam. We will come immediately." But by the time they reached Mabel Creek, Gary had already asked 3 questions. How many acres? Any debt? Was there a will? Lyle had asked only one. "Do you think he left us anything?" Gary had laughed. "Who else is there?" That answer would come soon enough. The funeral was held Friday morning at Mabel Creek Community Church. The sky was pale and cold. Not raining, not snowing, just hanging low over the town like it had not made up its mind. 9 people came. Ruth Bell sat in the 3rd pew, hands folded tight in her lap. Deputy Caleb sat near the back, still carrying the envelope he had not opened. Millie came from the diner with a covered dish nobody had asked for. Agnes Crow came because she remembered Sam as a boy who once carried her school books home when older boys had thrown them in the mud. Dr. Harlan came because he had signed the certificate, and because some patients become more than patients, even if neither of you says so. A young woman named Tessa Reed came in late, holding the hand of her little boy. Nobody knew why she was there. Gary and Lyle came in dark suits that looked rented, though both men could afford better. The preacher, Pastor Eli Morris, stood at the front with a worn Bible and a face full of disappointment he tried to hide as mercy. He had expected more people. Maybe not a full church. Sam had not been easy, but he had expected more than 9. The old rancher had bought feed in that town, paid taxes in that town, helped pull trucks out of ditches in that town, sat through school plays and county fairs and livestock auctions. He had been difficult, yes. Quiet, yes. Sharp when cornered, certainly. But a whole life should weigh more than 9 people. Pastor Morris cleared his throat. Samuel Whitaker was not a man who wasted words, he began. Gary leaned toward Lyle and whispered, "That is one way to put it." Ruth heard him. So did Caleb. Caleb turned his head slightly, and Gary found something very interesting on the floor. The preacher continued, "Some people serve loudly. Some serve where everyone can see. Some serve so quietly that we do not know the full measure of them until the chair is empty." At that, Dr. Harlan looked down. Millie wiped her eyes with a napkin from her purse. Tessa Reed pulled her little boy closer. After the service, the burial took place on a rise behind the church, beside a line of old cottonwoods. Sam had chosen the spot himself years earlier, according to Pastor Morris. He had paid for the plot in advance and left instructions written in pencil. No speeches after, no flowers except wild ones, no fuss. That was Sam. But when the coffin was lowered, something happened that nobody expected. Tessa Reed's little boy stepped forward. He could not have been more than 6. He was small, with brown hair sticking out from under his winter cap, and a face too serious for a child. In his hand was a toy horse, brown plastic with one chipped ear. His mother whispered, "Noah, wait." But the boy kept walking until he stood near the grave. He placed the toy horse on top of the coffin. Then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Thank you for my house, Mr. Sam." The adults went still. Gary frowned. Lyle blinked.
Pastor Morris closed his eyes, as if he had been expecting a secret to start leaking, and now here it was, finding the first crack. Caleb looked at Tessa. Her face had gone red. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the cold ground. But the boy did not understand shame. Children rarely do, until adults teach it to them. He only looked at the coffin and said, "Mama said you fixed the roof." Ruth Bell pressed a hand to her mouth. Gary whispered, "What roof?" Nobody answered. The funeral ended in a silence heavier than the one that had begun it. Afterward, everyone drifted toward the church hall for coffee nobody wanted, and pie Millie had brought because grief, in her opinion, should never be left hungry. Gary and Lyle did not go for pie. They went straight to Pastor Morris. "We need to know who is handling the estate," Gary said. Pastor Morris looked at him for a long second. "Good morning to you too, Gary." Gary forced a smile. "Of course. Sad day. Very sad. We are family, so we need to understand the process. There is a lawyer coming this afternoon." "From where?" "Springfield." Gary's smile slipped. "Why Springfield?" "Because that is where Sam's lawyer practices." "I did not know he had a lawyer." Pastor Morris nodded. "That appears to be true." Lyle tugged at Gary's sleeve, but Gary ignored him. "We are his closest relatives." "Maybe by blood," the pastor said. The words were soft, but they landed hard. Gary's jaw tightened. Caleb saw it from across the room. He had seen that kind of anger before. The anger of a man who believed politeness was something other people owed him, not something he owed back. The lawyer arrived at 3 that afternoon. Her name was Elaine Porter. Not old, not young, gray suit, small leather bag, eyes like a person who listened for a living and missed very little. She asked to meet at Sam's ranch. That surprised everyone. Gary wanted the meeting at the church. Lyle wanted it at the diner. Pastor Morris suggested his office. Elaine Porter said, "Mr. Whitaker requested the reading take place in his kitchen." Gary laughed once. "He requested?" "Yes." "And if the family objects?" Elaine looked at him over her glasses. "Then the family may object. From his kitchen." That was the first time Caleb almost smiled that day. So they drove to the North Ridge. The convoy looked strange on the gravel road. A deputy's cruiser, the lawyer's sedan, Gary's black sport utility vehicle, Lyle's rented car, Pastor Morris's old pickup, Ruth's mail truck, and Millie's station wagon. Because Millie had decided someone needed to bring sandwiches. "This is not a picnic," Gary said when he saw her carrying a basket. Millie looked at him. "That is why I did not bring a blanket." Sam's house seemed to be waiting for them. The porch chair sat still. The boots remained by the door. The air smelled of cedar smoke from wood that had burned down days before. Elaine Porter did not sit at the head of the table. She placed her leather bag there instead. Then she removed a folder, a sealed envelope, and a small notebook bound with a rubber band. Gary's eyes went straight to the folder. Lyle's went to the envelope. Caleb's went to the brass key on the counter, the key from Sam's bedroom. Elaine noticed. "Deputy Norris," she said, "did you bring the envelope Mr. Whitaker left for you?" Caleb stiffened. "Yes, ma'am." "Have you opened it?" "No." "Good. He asked that you wait until today." Gary sat up. "Why would he leave something for a deputy?" Elaine opened the folder.
because he trusted him. That quieted the room. For a while. The will was shorter than Gary expected. He had imagined pages, legal language, complicated clauses, maybe enough room to challenge something. Instead, Elaine read in a calm voice from a document that sounded very much like Sam Whitaker. Plain, sharp, uninterested in making greedy people comfortable. He left his personal truck to Ruth Bell. Ruth gasped, as if someone had accused her of stealing it.
"No," she said.
"Absolutely not." Elaine glanced up. "He wrote that you were the only person who came to his gate every day without wanting a thing from him. He wanted you to have a truck that can handle the North Road in winter." Ruth began to cry. "He left his saddle, bridle, and old spurs to Noah Reed, the little boy from the funeral, when he was old enough." Tessa lowered her face into her hands. "He left a savings account to Dr. Harlan to be used for unpaid medical bills of elderly patients in Mabel Creek who were too proud to ask for help." Dr. Harlan removed his glasses and turned toward the window. "He left funds to the church food pantry."
"He left land along the creek to the town, but only if it was made into a public walking path and never sold to developers." Mayor Whitcomb, who had come uninvited and was standing near the back door, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Then Elaine paused. Gary leaned forward. "Here it comes," his face said. "The ranch, the house, the pastures, the North Barn, the land that mattered." Elaine turned the page. "As for the Whitaker Ranch," she read, "including the house, barns, pastures, equipment, mineral rights, water rights, and all remaining assets not otherwise named, I leave them in full to the Mabel Creek Trust for Widows, Orphans, and the Forgotten, to be managed under the terms enclosed and opened only after the blue string key has been used." No one moved. Then Gary stood up. "Absolutely not." Elaine did not look surprised. Lyle whispered, "What does that mean?" "It means," Gary said, pointing at the lawyer, "this is nonsense." Elaine folded her hands. "It means your uncle created a charitable trust." "He was not in his right mind." "He was examined by 2 physicians at the time of signing." "He had no right." At that, Millie put down the sandwich basket. "No right to give away his own ranch?" Gary turned on her. "This is family business." "Then perhaps family should have visited." The room went silent again. Gary's face darkened. "We will contest this." Elaine nodded once. "That is your legal right." "Good. But before you spend money doing that, you may want to know what is in the barn." That was when Caleb felt the envelope in his coat pocket, like it had become warm. Elaine turned to him. "Deputy Norris, please open your letter." Caleb did. Inside was a single sheet in Sam's handwriting. "Caleb, if you are reading this, I expect they are all sitting in my kitchen, trying to decide whether I was foolish, bitter, crazy, or all 3. Let them wonder. The blue key opens the North Barn office. Inside the office, under the loose board beneath the feed ledger shelf, you will find the record. Take Pastor Morris, Miss Bell, Dr. Harlan, and Miss Reed with you. Take the lawyer too. Do not take my nephews unless you want to hear men complain while truth is trying to speak." Caleb stopped reading there because Millie made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Gary tried to snatch the paper. Caleb moved it out of reach without looking up. Then he finished. "I did not die alone. Some folks will say I did. They will be wrong. A man is not alone if he spends his life keeping watch over people who never knew his name. Sam." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Pastor Morris said, "We should go to the barn."
The north barn stood behind the house, larger than it looked from the road. Its red paint had faded almost brown. One side leaned slightly, and wind whistled through gaps in the boards. Gary followed anyway. Elaine turned at the barn door. Mr. Whitaker's instructions were specific. "I am family," Gary said. "You are not invited." "This is outrageous." Caleb stepped between them. "Gary, just his name, nothing more." Gary looked at him, then at the barn, then at the others. He wanted a fight, but not one with witnesses who already disliked him. He stayed outside with Lyle. Inside, the barn smelled of hay, dust, leather, and old machinery. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the boards, making thin, bright lines across the floor. Caleb led them past empty stalls and the workbench covered in tools arranged with military neatness. At the back was a small office. The brass key fit. The door opened with a groan. Inside were shelves of ledgers, not one or two, dozens, each one labeled by year in Sam's careful handwriting. There were boxes, too, shoe boxes, cigar boxes, metal tins, bundles of letters tied with string. Caleb found the loose board beneath the feed ledger shelf. Under it was a flat wooden box. Inside the box was a stack of notebooks, a bank envelope, several photographs, and a letter addressed to the town of Mabel Creek. Elaine Porter took the letter. Her hands were steady, but her face had changed. She knew, somehow, that the will had only been the door. This was the room behind it. They carried the box back to the kitchen. Gary and Lyle were waiting on the porch. "What is that?" Gary asked. "A record," Caleb said. "Of what?" Nobody answered him. Elaine placed the box on the kitchen table and opened the letter addressed to the town. Then she began to read. "To the people of Mabel Creek, if you came today because you loved me, thank you. If you came because you were curious, I understand. If you came because you wanted my land, sit down. This may take a while." Millie covered her mouth. Even Pastor Morris looked like he might smile. Elaine continued. "I was not an easy man, I know that. Some of you thought I was mean. Some thought proud. Some thought I looked down on people. The truth is simpler and sadder. I was afraid that if I let people close, the Lord would take them too. He had already taken my wife. He had already taken my daughter. He had already taken a little boy who never got to ride the pony I bought him. So I kept the gate locked. But a locked gate is not the same as a closed heart." Ruth began to cry harder. No one in the room had known about a daughter, not really. There had been whispers years ago, but whispers fade when nobody feeds them. Sam had been married once, to a woman named Clara. That much some people remembered. They knew she had died young. They knew Sam had changed after that. But a daughter, a grandson? Those parts had been buried deeper. Elaine read on. "When Clara died, I blamed the town because grief is foolish and needs somewhere to point. When my daughter Grace left, I blamed myself because grief is honest sometimes, and I deserved that one. When word came years later that Grace and her little boy had died on a highway outside Tulsa, I stopped speaking unless I had to. There are wounds that do not bleed, where people can see. I had plenty, but I also had land. I had cattle. I had more money than people guessed, mostly because I never spent it on anything except feed, taxes, and repairs. A man can rot inside if he only sits with what he lost. So I began putting what I had left toward people who still had a chance." The first ledger was from more than 30 years earlier. Dr. Harlan opened it. Inside were names, dates, amounts, but not written like a business record, written like prayers. Agnes Crow, furnace repair after January freeze, paid through Miller Hardware. Do not tell her. Harold and June Price, medicine balance, paid through Dr. Harlan. Say billing error if asked. Tessa Reed, roof leak over nursery, paid through Brenner Roofing. Tell them donation fund. Millie's Diner, New stove after fire, paid through supplier. Let her think insurance covered more than it did. Millie sat down hard. "No," she whispered. But there it was, ledger after ledger, year after year. A school lunch account cleared, a widow's taxes paid, a veteran's truck repaired, a child's surgery funded through a church collection that had never actually collected enough, groceries left on porches during the flood year, coal bought for families during the winter nobody in town liked to remember, college tuition for a girl whose father had died in a silo accident,
dental work for a boy who smiled with his mouth closed. No one had known. That was the part that broke them. People can accept kindness when they can thank someone for it. But hidden kindness reaches backward through time. It changes memories. It makes a person look at their own life and realize there was a hand under them when they thought they had only survived by luck. Tessa Reed picked up one photograph from the box. It showed Sam standing on the porch of her small house while roofers worked behind him. He was turned away from the camera, hat low, one hand on the railing. Her son Noah, much smaller then, stood at the screen door holding the same toy horse he had placed on the coffin. Tessa pressed the photograph to her chest. "He told me the church helped," she said. Pastor Morris looked at the ledger. "He used my name for years," he said softly, "and I never knew." Elaine continued reading. "I do not write this so you will praise me. I will be dead, and praise does not do much for a dead man.
I write it because the trust must be understood. The ranch is not to become houses for rich people who want a view. It is not to become a shopping center. It is not to become a monument to me. If anyone puts my face on a plaque, I will haunt the committee." Ruth laughed through her tears. "The ranch is to become a place for people who have been set aside. The farmhouse is to be repaired and used as a home for widows who need time before they can stand again. The east pasture is to be used for children who need summer air and a safe horse to brush. The north barn is to become a workshop for men and women who are lonely enough to forget they still know how to make useful things. The creek field is to stay wild. Let children run there. Let old people sit there. Let nobody sell it. And if my nephews object, remind them of the last letter I sent them." Gary, who had been standing by the door, went pale. Lyle looked at him. "What letter?" Gary said nothing.
Elaine reached into the folder and removed another envelope. "Mr. Whitaker included a copy."
Gary stepped forward. "That is private."
"Not anymore,"
Elaine said.
She read it. "Gary and Lyle, I am writing because I am old enough to know when men are waiting for another man to die. You have not called in years unless you needed something. You did not come when I broke my hip. You did not come when the north fence burned. You did not come when I invited you for Thanksgiving, though I bought a turkey big enough for people who never arrived. I forgave that. Then you sent a man to ask whether I would sell the ranch, before I was too confused to make decisions. I did not forgive that. Blood is not the same as love. Do not come for what you did not care for. Sam." Lyle stared at Gary. "You sent someone?" Gary's mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, he had none polished enough. Outside, the wind moved against the kitchen windows. Inside, everyone seemed to understand at the same time that Sam Whitaker had not been the lonely fool some had imagined. He had seen everything. He had kept account, not only of money, of character. That evening, the news spread through Mabel Creek again, but this time, rumor had to move aside for truth. By dusk, people began coming to the ranch, not for land, not for money, for answers. Agnes Crow came with an old receipt from Miller Hardware and cried when she found her name in the ledger. Dale Rigsby came because he remembered a year when his hay crop failed and an anonymous buyer paid too much for 3 skinny calves. Sam's ledger showed why. A woman from the bank came because her mother had died owing money, and somehow the account had been settled before foreclosure. Sam's ledger showed the payment. A man who had once called Sam Whitaker a bitter old goat stood in the barn office with his hat in both hands and said, "He paid for my daughter's medicine." I never knew.
Nobody knew what to do with all that guilt.
Mabel Creek had judged a man by his locked gate. Now they had to live with what he had been doing behind it. The next Sunday the church was full, not for a funeral this time, for a meeting. Elaine Porter stood at the front with the trust papers. Pastor Morris stood beside her. Caleb leaned against the back wall. Ruth sat near the aisle, still refusing to accept the truck until Elaine explained that refusing a dead man's final stubbornness was rarely successful. Tessa and Noah sat together. Noah held the chipped toy horse. Gary and Lyle came too. Nobody expected that. Gary looked smaller somehow.
Men like him often do when they enter a room where they cannot control the story.
Lyle looked as if he had not slept. The meeting began with legal details, property boundaries, trustees, restrictions, funds, maintenance, all the necessary parts that make kindness survive after the first wave of emotion passes. Then Pastor Morris asked if anyone wanted to speak.
For a while, nobody did.
Then Lyle stood. Gary grabbed his sleeve. Lyle pulled away. He walked to the front of the church with his eyes down. "I do not deserve to say anything," he began. That was a good start, in Millie's opinion. Lyle swallowed. "Uncle Sam invited us for Thanksgiving. It was true. I remember. Gary said it was too far to drive, and that the old man probably only wanted help fixing something. So we did not come." Gary stared at the floor. "I wanted the ranch," Lyle said. "I did. I thought because we were blood it should come to us. But sitting in that kitchen, hearing what he did for people, I realized something. He was more family to this town than I was to him." No one clapped. It was not that kind of moment. Lyle wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I am sorry," he said. Then he looked at Tessa. "And I am sorry for asking in my own mind why your son got anything. I know why now. He showed up with love when grown men showed up with empty hands."
Tessa nodded once. That was all.
Sometimes forgiveness begins as a nod, because words are too large to carry. Gary did not speak. Not then. But he did not contest the will. 2 weeks later, his lawyer sent a letter saying the family would not pursue legal action. No apology, no explanation, just a withdrawal. Millie said that was the closest some people ever get to decency. Work on the ranch began in spring. At first, people came because guilt pushed them. They repaired porch steps, cleared brush, painted stalls, fixed fences, replaced broken windows. The mayor came too, though Millie watched him closely and made sure he did not talk about tourism. Then, little by little, people came for better reasons. Because the place needed them. Because Sam had been right. Because widows did need a place to sit where nobody rushed them. Because children who had been through too much did need summer air and a safe horse to brush. Because lonely old men did remember how to make useful things when someone handed them a piece of wood and asked for help. The first widow to stay in the farmhouse was named Helen Price. Her husband had died in February, and by May she had stopped answering the phone. Her daughter lived 4 states away and worried herself sick. Pastor Morris suggested the Whitaker house. Helen said no. Then she said maybe. Then she came for one afternoon and sat on the porch where Sam's rocking chair had been. The next week, she stayed overnight. By summer, she was helping in the kitchen and telling everyone the pantry needed organizing by a person with sense. The first child to brush a horse in the East pasture was Noah Reed. The horse was old, gentle, and named Biscuit by committee, which was the kind of name Sam would have hated and secretly allowed. Noah brushed that horse like he was polishing treasure. When he finished, he looked toward the barn and said, "Do you think Mr. Sam can see?" Tessa answered, "I think you would pretend not to." Noah nodded. "But he can." Tessa smiled. "Yes, I think he can." The North Barn workshop opened in September. At first, 3 men came, then 7, then women came too, because Millie pointed out that loneliness did not belong to one gender, and neither did tools. They repaired chairs, made birdhouses, built shelves for the food pantry, and once, after much argument, restored a wooden cradle found in the barn loft. Inside the cradle, tucked beneath the old mattress board, Caleb found a faded ribbon and a small card. Grace, Sam's daughter. The room went quiet when he showed Pastor Morris. They placed the card in a glass frame in the farmhouse parlor, not as a monument, as a memory returned to the house where it belonged. By the first anniversary of Sam's death, the ranch had a new name. Nobody voted on it. Nobody announced it. People simply began calling it Sam's Place. The trust papers still had the formal name, long and proper, but in town, it was Sam's Place. As in, Helen is staying at Sam's place until she feels stronger. The kids are going to Sam's place this weekend. Bring those extra blankets to Sam's place. The old man who had been buried with only 9 people now had his name spoken daily by almost everyone. And that might have been the end of the story, if not for what happened the following winter. It was Ruth Bell who found the last box. Of course it was Ruth. Some people are put in a story at the beginning because they are meant to carry something all the way through. She had finally accepted Sam's truck, though she still said thank you every time she started it. That December, she drove it to the ranch with a load of donated coats in the back. A storm was coming, the kind that makes animals uneasy and old bones ache. Ruth was helping Caleb move boxes in the barn office when she noticed the shelf behind the old ledgers did not sit flush against the wall. "Caleb?" she said. He looked over.
"What did you find now?"
"Maybe nothing."
But in Mabel Creek, maybe nothing had become a phrase people treated carefully. They moved the shelf. Behind it was a narrow panel. Behind the panel was a metal box. Inside the metal box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Grace, Sam's daughter. None had been mailed. Caleb should have called the lane porter first. He knew that. Instead, he called Pastor Morris, Ruth, Tessa, and Dr. Harlan. Some truths are legal. Some are sacred. These felt sacred. They gathered in the farmhouse parlor while snow began to fall outside. Pastor Morris opened the first letter. "My Grace, I do not know where you are living now. Your mother would tell me to stop being stubborn and write anyway, so I am writing. I was wrong." That was all the first letter said. 3 words. But 3 words can carry a whole broken life. The next letters told the rest. Sam had fought with his daughter after Clara died.
Grace had wanted to leave Mabel Creek, go to nursing school, make a life beyond cattle and grief, and a father who had forgotten how to be soft. Sam had taken her leaving as betrayal. Grace had taken his anger as proof he did not love her. Both had been young in the way grieving people are young, no matter their age. They had stopped speaking. Years later, when Sam tried to find her, she had moved. Then came the accident. After that, the letters became confessions. "I bought a pony for your boy, though he will never ride it. I kept your room the same until the dust made me ashamed. I do not know what to do with all this love, Grace. It has nowhere to go. So I am sending it outward. Maybe that is what love is supposed to do when the person you saved it for is gone." Tessa cried openly. Ruth did too. Caleb stood by the window and blinked more than necessary. The final letter was different. It was addressed not to Grace, but to whoever found the box.
"If these letters are found, do not make me a saint. I was not one. I wasted years being angry at the person I loved most because I did not know how to say I was afraid. If there is any lesson in my life, let it be this. Do not wait until the chair is empty. Do not wait until the road is washed out. Do not wait until a name is carved in stone. Say the thing. Make the call. Knock on the door. Forgive before pride turns into a locked gate. And if someone in Mabel Creek is still waiting for proof that they matter, use what I left to show them. I had more than I deserved. Give it where it can still do some good. Sam. The storm arrived hard that night. Roads closed, power flickered, trees bent under ice. And at Sam's place, the farmhouse filled with people. Helen Price made soup. Noah carried blankets. Caleb checked the generator. Ruth made coffee strong enough to frighten the tired. Pastor Morris read names from the ledgers, not as accounts, but as witnesses.
People slept on couches, on rugs, in chairs, under quilts that smelled like cedar and laundry soap. Outside, the wind battered the old house. Inside, nobody was alone. At some point near dawn, when the storm had quieted and the windows had turned pale blue with morning, Tessa found Noah standing in the parlor. He was looking at the framed card with Grace's name. "Mama," he said, "Mr. Sam lost his little boy too, right?" Tessa touched his shoulder. "Yes." "And his daughter?" "Yes." "So he helped us because he still had love left?" Tessa took a breath. "I think so." Noah nodded, thinking it over with the seriousness only children and old people seemed to understand. Then he said, "That is a good thing to do with it." Tessa looked around the room, at Helen asleep in the chair, at Ruth pouring coffee, at Caleb carrying firewood, at the snow outside and the warm house inside. "Yes," she said, "it is." A year after that, on a clear autumn afternoon, Mabel Creek held a dedication for the finished walking path along the creek field. There was no statue. Sam had forbidden that. There was no portrait. He would have hated that even more. Instead, near the first bend in the path, they placed a small wooden sign carved by the workshop. It said only this: "For those who think they have been forgotten, you have not." Below it, in smaller letters, was Sam's name. Samuel Whitaker, rancher, neighbor. That last word had caused a long discussion. Was he a neighbor if he kept to himself? Was he a neighbor if half the town barely knew him? Was he a neighbor if he helped from behind locked gates and false names and paid invoices? In the end, Millie settled it. "A neighbor is not the person closest to your house," she said. "It is the person who notices when your light goes out." So neighbor stayed. Gary Whitaker came to the dedication. No one expected that either. He stood at the edge of the crowd, older looking than before. Pride had not left him entirely. Pride rarely leaves all at once, but something had cracked. After the ceremony, he walked up to Lyle, who had begun volunteering at the workshop once a month. Gary held out an envelope. "What is that?" Lyle asked. "Money." Lyle looked suspicious. "For what?" Gary glanced toward the sign. "For the trust." Lyle did not take it right away. "Why?" Gary's jaw moved. For a second it seemed he might turn hard again. Then he sighed. "Because I missed Thanksgiving," he said. Lyle took the envelope. It was not enough to undo anything, but it was a beginning. Sam would have complained about the ceremony. Everyone knew that. He would have said the sign was too nice, the path too wide, the coffee too weak, and the speeches too long. But when the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the children ran ahead along the creek, even the people who did not believe in such things felt something like approval in the air. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. Like a hand resting on a porch rail. Like a truck slowing at a mailbox. Like a locked gate finally standing open. Years later, people in Mabel Creek would still tell the story of old Sam Whitaker. They would say he died alone, because that was how the story began. Then someone who knew better would shake their head. No, he died quiet. That is not the same thing. He died with ledgers full of mercy. He died with letters full of regret. He died with a plan that turned a lonely ranch into a home for people who thought they had nowhere left to go. And maybe that is the thing about a life. You cannot always measure it by who stands beside the bed at the end. Sometimes you measure it by the roofs that did not collapse, the medicine that was paid for, the child who had summer air, the widow who slept one good night after months of fear, the old man who found his hands still knew how to build, the town that learned, too late, but not too late for everyone, that quiet people sometimes carry the loudest love. Sam Whitaker did not leave children. He did not leave a fortune to men who waited for him to die. He did not leave behind a mansion, a monument, or a name carved in marble. He left a place. He left a warning. He left a second chance. And in the end, that was more than anyone in Mabel Creek had expected. It was more than some of them deserved. But Sam had never been as hard as they thought. He had only been a man who lost too much, locked the gate, and then spent the rest of his life quietly opening doors for everyone else. If you enjoyed this story, thank you for spending your time with Mabel Creek Stories. There are more quiet roads, old letters, family secrets, and second chances waiting here. And remember, in Mabel Creek, the truth always finds its way home.